Hello, guys and girls. The program you are about to hear will be both fun and educational, but it is not a substitute for medical advice. Although we are doctors, we are not your doctors.
Hello and welcome to Travel Medicine. As always, I'm your friendly neighborhood internal medicine doc, Dr. J.
Hey guys, Dr. Santhosh here, your pediatric infectious disease doc, sometime researcher.
And joining us, for reasons that will soon become clear, is friend of the show and pharmacist, Eleanor Rangers. Or wait,
Hello, everyone. Hello again.
that's how she spelled it, not me.
Wow, sheesh. Oh, I thought you were going to do the pharmacist of space.
Oh, yes, no. Pharmacist of space.
You're right.
I should have.
That was a good one, too.
Yeah.
But no, we are keeping things firmly down to earth this week.
Yes, farm, like F-A-R-M instead of P-H-A-R-M.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, I get it, because the first topic, because it comes from flowers. Like, aha. No.
And we're growing knowledge. We're not cowed by criticism.
You're cultivating new.
Oh, not you too. That too, Eleanor.
Yeah. But you may be wondering why we have our pharmacist, usually from space, on the show. And that is, as you may have guessed, it's a drug-related episode.
Excellent. But the legal drugs, well, mostly legal.
Mostly, yeah.
And not just any drugs. I'm going to make a bold and possibly controversial claim. These are 7 drugs that change the world. I challenged you to come up with 7 drugs that you think changed essentially the course of human history. So I want to see where our lists match up. Let's go by consensus. So I'll name and you guys can tell me whether or not you have it on. But Eleanor, would you like to start us off as our expert? I trust you to tell me what you think, in no particular order. Give me a drug that changed the world.
Well, I think we're going to have a lot of concordance on our list. Do you want me to list all 7 of mine or just one of them?
Whatever your preference, and we will take it from there.
First one that comes to mind for me are the HMG-CoA reductase inhibitors, otherwise known as statins.
Ooh.
Okay, didn't make my list at all. Santhosh?
I'm going to say penicillin.
Okay,
Yeah,
so statins, Eleanor, why?
I think those were or are a real game changer in the world of cardiovascular disease because the first statin drug was actually approved in 1987, actually by Merck, and it was a drug called lovastatin, and or Mevacor was its brand name. Up until that time, basically we knew that heart disease was associated with certain types of diseases like high blood pressure or elevated cholesterol. But with elevated cholesterol, there was actually a lot of controversy about whether if you could give a drug to reduce your cholesterol, would it actually reduce your risk of dying or having a heart attack? And there actually was a fair amount of controversy in the scientific community about whether it made any difference in terms of overall causes of death. So this was actually very controversial. And then lo and behold, Merck, enters the market with a brand new drug that works a brand new way compared to older drugs that were being used to lower cholesterol that were possibly, not associated with reducing death. So Merck had to invest in a very large study to actually evaluate whether lowering cholesterol with their drug that they approved called Zocor or simvastatin.
Oh, I remember that one.
Yeah, so Mevacor
It's not around anymore.
Then, no, it's not branded anymore. It's generic. But they actually evaluated Zocor, simvastatin, in a very large study known as the 4S trial. And this was conducted in one of the parts of the world that has the highest amounts of heart disease and the highest average cholesterol levels, and that's in Scandinavia.
Sounds like some serious science. That's serious what the 4S's are, right?
That's right. And so, lo and behold, the study finishes up and reports in 1994, and for the very first time, it was demonstrated that by lowering your cholesterol, you could lower your risk, lower the risk of total mortality in that study population, as well as the risk of heart attacks and other types of endpoints. So this was a real game changer in the world of treating heart disease. And of course, then, many other companies came out with their own statin drugs and studied these things much more widely and extensively. And now it's very well accepted that if you have elevated cholesterol, you need to lower it. And more than likely, you're going to end up probably on a drug like a statin to reduce your risk of dying from a heart attack. I think that's a real game changer in terms of prolonging life. So that's why I think of those drugs as kind of near and dear to my heart.
This is why we like her.
Someone who can match puns with you. Yeah, that's a rare human.
Gets me right in the aorta. I'm choking up.
I'll add in from the clinical side, and Josh, because this is much more internal medicine than it is pediatric, but I know that from the scientific basis, this really, when statins, HMG-CoA reductase inhibitors, the long crazy term, and which is what it actually does, and statins and everything, this was in the midst of the debate of dietary cholesterol, and then this, those of us who lived through it, that was like, eat eggs, don't eat eggs, and all this kind of thing. We went back and forth, and whether dietary cholesterol, went along with, the levels of cholesterol that we had in our bloodstream, like LDL and HDL, but it kind of right at that time was also when we were changing the idea of what actually caused an acute coronary plaque and what built up, because it used to be this very static picture from a scientific standpoint of like, a bunch of crud gets built up slowly over time and then you get a blockage. But now, especially with the statins, we found out that more than anything, it was modulating inflammation rather than actual, cholesterol per se. You'd actually have to have instability of the plaque and then rupture so that you'd have a sudden, clot formation and everything. And this had to do with how cholesterol actually interacted with the walls of the artery and if there was inflammation along with it and all this kind of a thing. And I think that is actually what led to, and correct me if I'm wrong, but statins are now used for like acute heart attacks as well, right?
There is some data that right after either an intervention when someone has like they used when they would open up the artery, or the cath. Or after an acute event. But by and large, they're really outpatient medication.
Part of understanding that pathophysiology was actually inventing and using statins.
Yep.
So that's one of the first, and right off the bat, we have differences. So I'm going to do, I think, chronologically, and I'm going to take it back to the old school, because I'm an old fool who's so cool. If you want to lay down and soothe your pain, we head to the 1800s
and
for
take
some
cocaine.
Close, morphine.
Oh, you spit in the face of rhyme scheme.
So since 1805, Morphine and its derivatives have been the most widely used treatment for severe pain, with over 230 tons of morphine each year for medical purposes alone.
Whoa. I've never ever thought of morphine in that unit before in tons.
Really? Because it always feels like my patients have a pain that can only be solved by a ton of morphine.
Oh no.
So
Oh, dear.
it was discovered by Friedrich Wilhelm Adam Serturner, a obscure, uneducated, unknown 21-year-old pharmacist's assistant with no equipment and a bunch of curiosity. And he was just like, I wonder if opium can do anything medically, which was, fairly widely used by 18th century physicians. And so then he started just doing a bunch of experiments in his spare time.
Yeah.
And in 1806, he isolated a organic compound from the gum secreted by the opium poppy, which Latin name Papaver somniferum, the sleepy flower.
Yes, it brings back memories of the Wizard of Oz. Remember when?
Yes,
sleep, falls asleep with the poppies.
So he found that if he removed an alkaloid group, there was no effect on animals, but the alkaloid alone had 10 times the power of processed opium.
Oh wow.
So in other words, this dude was like freebasing in Sir Turner's lab.
And published a paper on it. And was pretty proud of himself. So he experimented. He learned its therapeutic effects as well as the dangers.
Okay.
I flatter myself, he wrote in 1816, that my observations have explained to a considerable extent the constitution of opium, and that I have enriched chemistry with a new acid, meconic, and a new base, morphium, a remarkable substance.
I'm sure it was. You, of course, very accurately and elegantly said it was an organic compound. For all you hippies out there, all right, that's organic, meaning carbon-based.
Not organic as in sold at Whole Foods.
Yeah. Although it probably would have been upon first discovery, because it would have been a plant extract at the time.
This was also made, after we have this pharmacist assistant, just 2 decades later in 1827, Merck...
Just a second. Pharmacist assistant. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Just 2 decades later, Merck began marketing in 1827 morphine. And also the discovery of this alkaloid compound meant researchers soon started looking into other alkaloids, like, strychnine in 1817, but more importantly, caffeine in 1820. If there was no morphine, there'd be no caffeine.
Oh my gosh. Oh, yeah, because caffeine is yet another alkaloid.
And the drug, unsurprisingly, soared in usage after the hypodermic syringe was invented in 1852.
The effects of the poppy flower had been known for a long time before this, correct? Because, poppy, smoking it or using opium.
Yeah.
Was already
stuff in China.
Yeah. I mean, centuries before.
Overdoses from opium are probably more rare simply because nobody's really using opium outside of a certain genre of movie anymore.
Sure.
The more refined and processed this plant or this compound gets, the more dangerous it becomes.
Sure, of course.
So, of course, Bayer began producing and marketing this drug as an analgesic and a sedative for coughs in 1898. And I think we've talked about this before, but because of its heroic ability to relieve pain,
sure,
they called it heroin.
Although heroin's a different, that's a different alkaloid or opioid.
So while the medical profession initially welcomed morphine and then later heroin, the addictive potential was actually quite rapidly recognized. And by 1913, barely a decade later, Bayer halted production, completely edited the drug out of their official company history.
Wow.
and focused instead on marketing their second line blockbuster drug, which is the next one on my list in 1899, aspirin.
Wow, that's interesting.
Okay.
A little connection there between morphine and aspirin, or
Yeah.
heroin and aspirin. That's interesting. I didn't know that.
So aspirin wouldn't be as popular if heroin wasn't so darn addictive.
And of
But
course,
I
what pops into my head with heroin, I always think of the French connection too, with them getting Popeye Doyle addicted to heroin against his will, and to try to track down the guy that was like dealing or bringing in the heroin into New York, and he ends up getting captured by them, and like they end up like tying him down and getting him addicted to heroin, and then he had to go through like withdrawal. Oh, it was I stuck in my mind. I'm like, that was like the biggest. I'm never going to do drugs because I don't want to end up like Popeye Doyle in Marseille.
wow. Okay. No, wrong Popeye, dude.
Wrong
Not
Popeye.
No, the Sailor Man was doing other things.
Not
and Doug,
spinach. It was
it
heroin.
was not spinach.
So
He's mainlining spinach.
So, did either of you have aspirin on your list of 7 drugs that
I did.
You did?
I did.
And what about you?
I listed it as ASA instead of.
Oh, yeah, acetylsalicylic acid?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
That's
Yeah,
two
yeah.
tongue twisters in one episode.
I don't think I had aspirin. I believe I had morphine on there, however, because of really not just revolutionizing, pain control and this kind of a thing, just an entire class of pain control medications, but also because of the enormous societal impact that, opioids had across the board. Morphine has shifted geopolitics the way that oil has, for instance.
So
Yeah.
let's talk about aspirin.
Yeah.
It comes from willow bark, the willow tree. However, research on it only really started in early 19th century, which was driven by Napoleon's continental blockade on imports.
Whoa. Okay. Oh man, I
Which-
love this. You're
which
putting aspirin
affected-
together with Napoleon. That's awesome.
Which affected suppliers of Peruvian cinchona tree bark, another natural source of salicylic acid.
And I believe also quinine, right?
They believe so. Yeah, it could be.
Okay.
So they were importing these Peruvian trees because Napoleon was blockading imports. And so in Germany in 1828, Johann Buchner, a professor at the University of Munich, isolated a yellow substance from the tannin of willow trees that he named salicin, the Latin word for willow.
Oh, that's where it comes from. Okay.
But let's get back to Bayer. In the
Yeah.
late 1800s, a clothing dye manufacturing firm in Germany, Farbenfracken-Vormels, Frederick Bayer and Company, began to shift its focus from dyes to pharmaceutical production, as I guess a lot of the same lab equipment is necessary.
I
don't know.
don't know.
Actually, that's probably true, because here's another like really random thought. When I took organic chemistry, I remember in organic chemistry lab, we made actually this like orange dye, and it was to illustrate like a particular type of reaction that we learned about in class, the azo-coupling reaction. I don't know why I remember that, but I do, and that's really disturbing.
So, because the Bayer company was already well known, it had brand name recognition when it switched over to pharmaceuticals.
Okay, very cool.
So, we go to one of their chemists, Felix Hoffmann, who the company credits, and there's some controversy around this, but the company credits Felix Hoffmann with the synthesis of pure acetylsalicylic acid. Arthur Eichengrun, the head of chemical research, who said he had discovered salicylic acid or had been working on it and assigned the task of developing a better one to one of the company's chemists. He was grad studenting him.
Sure.
And
Yeah. Okay.
Hoffman had a personal interest in this because his father suffered from rheumatism, but he could no longer ingest just plain old salicylic acid without vomiting.
Because it irritates the stomach quite a bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he found a way to alter the acid chemically by modifying, here you go, Eleanor, the hydroxyl group on the benzene ring.
Oh, there you go. As long as we can get the term benzene in here, we're good.
Yeah.
The main takeaway from this is that the body could now absorb the compounds without causing stomach upset. Because once ingested, the stomach acid would break it back down to the active ingredient in the stomach, liver, and blood, giving you the desired benefits without any consequences whatsoever until we learned about them in, I don't know, the 80s.
Yeah. Sure.
But according to the theory concerning the origin, aspirin comes from the combination of the word acetyl, which is one of the modifications you can make,
Mhm.
and the Latin spirea, the genus of plants which contains meadowsweet and salicylic aldehyde, which is a precursor to salicylic acid. It's the German word for it. Spisauer. Just take my word for it. It's a common name, a common ending for drug names at the time.
I think it's Spirsaure.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm probably butchering that. That's
But
okay.
here we go. It's another painkiller. It doesn't have anywhere near the addictive potential that morphine does,
Sure.
which is why it's their second line drug. And then in 1915, aspirin becomes available to the public without a prescription.
Ooh.
Okay. And I would have loved to have. This is the stuff that I don't really understand is what's the approval process that a medication like that goes through? Because I'm guessing there was a kind of FDA at that time, like a controlling organization. So
Yeah, there was all the way. Yeah, I believe there was all the way back at the turn of the last century. Yeah.
yeah, so I'd love to know because they'd have to have criteria in place, right? To say this is safe enough that a person can buy it without needing a script.
I don't know what the policies, what the regulations were back then for over-the-counter stuff.
Sure.
So next time you're at bar trivia, the oldest over-the-counter mass market medicine, 1915, aspirin.
Hey. This is why Bayer Pharmaceuticals, like when you see them flashing their logo and everything, that's the one that they talk about being like, we've been here since, that kind of
We've been here since heroin.
Yeah.
Now, Bob.
No. Aspirin.
Aspirin.
Yeah, aspirin, not heroin.
Yeah. Wait. We've erased that from our records. Yes, it's not heroin.
No, because I'm imagining like an ad executive coming in, just like, you guys, I've got the slogan. This is going to be the next, Just Do It by Nike. We've been here since heroin. And 18 pairs of eyes just turn towards him.
Just do it.
Okay, Nike has Just Do It. We're going to say we've been here since heroin. Doug. Maybe say aspirin.
All right. So we're into the 1900s, and aspirin, the greatest thing since sliced bread to hit mass market. But it would only be a few years until we hit what I put as the third drug on my list, and that is insulin.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yay! Yeah.
So, what about you two? Did insulin make your 7?
Insulin did make the list. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, for me as well, not just because it absolutely shattered what we knew about diabetes. The fact that you could replace a hormone, that's insane. And I think even during and before this time of the discovery of insulin, we'd been trying to do this. We've been trying to replace all kinds of hormones. And this was one of the first like biologics that came in. So just like, oh yeah, we can just do replacement. But it ushered in that entire era, and it was kind of an example more than anything else. But for sure, like all of a sudden you had an absolutely incurable disease, which was type 1 diabetes, that autoimmune type that you get when you're very young because you destroy the cells in your pancreas that make it. And you just had a flat out cure. That's insane.
And here's why this is important for those of you listening at home. Individuals with advanced diabetes are unable to produce or respond to sufficient amounts of insulin, which is a hormone that turns sugar into energy. So before 1922, the only way to treat it was a near starvation diet, like
Yeah.
450 calories a day.
Yeah, it was awful because and we didn't have a great understanding of why this was. We just knew that having insanely high blood sugars was bad, and the only way to stop getting high blood sugars was to stop taking in sugar.
So it goes back to, again, Germany. 1869, German medical student Paul Langerhans discovered insulin cells in the pancreas. He named them insulin because they looked like islands, and because no man is a Langerhans.
No. No, he was Langerhans though.
In 1889,
Moving on.
two German researchers, Oskar Minkowski and Joseph von Mering, found that when the pancreas was removed from dogs, the animals became diabetic. This led to the idea that the pancreas is the site where these substances were produced. And in 1910, Sir Edward Albert Sharpie Schaefer, which is a real name.
Jingleheimer Schmidt?
Right?
John Jacob Sharpie Schaefer.
No, Sir Edward Albert Sharpie
Sir
Schaefer.
Edward Albert Sharpie Schaefer.
That's my name too. I took the pancreas out, and sugars would not shout.
Edward Albert Sharpie Schaefer.
So he's actually the one who named insulin, meaning island.
Okay.
Although he probably thought to himself, because no man is a Langerhans.
No, it makes sense. It came from the Isles of Langerhans, the little islet cells, and therefore they're of the island. Insulin.
The next big step was, as we said, 1921, when Frederick Banting and his assistant Best figured out how to actually remove the insulin without taking out the pancreas, and they said it looked like thick brown muck. And with it, they kept another dog with diabetes alive for 70 days. It only deceased when there was no more insulin to provide it.
Oh, I see.
So 1922, we had finally a way to create insulin, and this led to the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for Banting, Best, and two collaborators, Collip and MacLeod, who is now immortal in history. And
That's right. And Banting and Best were from Canada.
And the first genetically engineered synthetic insulin wasn't made until 1978 using E. coli.
That was by Eli Lilly, I believe.
We now use E. coli all the time like this to just mass produce proteins and small peptides, which insulin is. And they're so neat because you can just basically give them on a plasmid, and you can say, hey, just read this stretch of genetic code and make this, please. And we'll give you all the nutrients you need, and you just make a ton of it. And then we'll kill all of you, purify the protein in giant vats, and that's what we do.
To remind you of my love. Da 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 da.
Yeah, exactly.
We're fattening up the E. coli's for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Santhosh, I know your number one was penicillin. Eleanor, I'm going to guess that you also had penicillin?
Penicillin was actually number 3 on my list.
Number 3. Okay, so how about the story of penicillin? Disease doctor or the drug expert, whoever thinks they've got the better story.
Oh, well,
Because I think the guy's a slob.
Yeah.
Alexander Fleming, that slob.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, you're saying he's a slob because of the. I think it's an apocryphal story, but there is some truth to it that he, was supposed to be, sterilizing these bacterial culture plates, and some of them had been left out, and they had become overgrown with a mold. And we actually do this with, now purified penicillin discs nowadays, but you can place, the mold down on a lawn of bacteria. And what you'll have around that little bit of growth of mold in the center of the plate is a zone of inhibition where the bacteria can't grow. And okay, fine. You can say he's a slob because he basically let the damn things get contaminated and it was an oops. But here's where you have a brilliant person like a scientist versus someone who is not. Okay? So the brilliant person will look at that plate like Dr. Fleming did, and he said, hey, why is that happening? Why is it that bacteria can't grow so close to the fungus? And take a look at it. Someone who didn't know what they were doing, Josh, a slob, would be like, and into the sink they go and scrub. But he made an observation, formed a hypothesis, and then from there the real discovery was after that.
Let me give you some context, and then we will turn to Eleanor to tell us about penicillin. Being a scientist and being intelligent does not preclude you being a slob. Fleming was so comfortable with mold and bacteria that he used them outside his lab as well, and would occasionally make use of the molds that frequently grew for painting. He upgraded from watercolors to bacteria in his artistic leisure hour pursuits, making landscapes by growing microbes with different natural pigments. He had discovered lysozyme, an antibacterial enzyme present in mucus and tears, when he decided to just, let his nose drip into a petri dish to see what happened.
Oh, that's lovely. So he was sort of like the Bob Ross of bacterial. It's like, there's a happy little fungus over there.
I'm going to stick my finger up my nose and then paint with it and see what grows and what doesn't.
I will say nowadays
Nobel Prize winning, life-changing.
I will say nowadays on Reddit and a couple of other, really wonderful sites, Tumblr and that kind of thing, you can find very, very artistic microbiologists who have gorgeous paint by number on, from bacteria and molds and stuff. My favorite actually is a Christmas tree, because you can use, green pigmented bacteria to make your tree, and beautiful, red and pink like serratia pigmented bacteria to make the ornaments and such. So yeah, it's become its own little art farm.
I stand by my statement. But Eleanor, what can you tell us about penicillin? Why is it impressive? I mean, what's the big deal?
What's the big deal?
What's the big deal? What's the deal with penicillin?
School of Eleanor.
Oh gosh, antibiotics were not sort of my strong suit in pharmacy school. But what I remember about penicillin is that I always think of penicillin in World War II being used for the troops. And I think it also was very effective at treating syphilis, if I recall.
It was, and troops and syphilis were two things that you could
hand in hand, so to speak.
And the Germans and the Axis partners could only produce very small amounts of penicillin, never enough to meet their military needs. As a result, their soldiers, when injured, would be out of commission longer and had to rely upon the far less effective sulfonamides, which had a higher side effect profile.
They didn't have combination sulfonamides yet, like we think of trimethoprim sulfa, because they work really well in combination. But if you're using them singly, they're much less bactericidal very quickly on the front end, meaning they kill with less efficiency the bacteria. And you're absolutely right. Taking in sulfur, and if you have to take in large amounts of it, our body really doesn't process it well. We're not well evolved to handle sulfur.
So penicillin actually helped win the war.
Yeah, it really did. And it was kind of interesting. I have to find this somewhere, but because thankfully, Sir Fleming was here, and I believe Churchill became sick at some point with a pneumonia or something like that. And I have to re-look this up because someone in the comment section will correct me on this. I believe the sulfonamides were discovered first.
Yeah, I believe that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, and because they were being developed by the Axis powers, and he was sick. He was like going to die, this man, and he was, I will not take that Nazi medication, just very much, like absolutely not. I don't care if it works. Yeah. The biggest thing for me, Josh, there have been a couple of interventions in medicine as a whole that have really changed how a person in general can live or die, and especially impactful in childhood. Number one, by far and away, which was known and then forgotten and then had to be relearned, was hand washing. There is no greater intervention in medicine and medical science than hand washing and cleaning. But a step just a little bit down from that is antibiotics. All of a sudden, just in that one, discovery of the mold by our friend and slob, Dr. Fleming,
Yes.
we had a instantaneous 30% drop in mortality. That's madness. To say that you just all of a sudden 1/3 of the people who would have died from pneumonia or sepsis or something like that, just boom, it's gone. And
That
you
means
just take
that,
them.
I don't know, like around 75% of people today would not be alive without it because your ancestors would have succumbed to infection.
Oh, huge. It was penicillin in this, and then prior to this, nitrogen fixation, where we actually learned to fix nitrogen and grow crops much quicker. We've saved billions of lives.
Honey, the nitrogen's broken again.
Yeah. Not like that.
So Fleming, despite being a slob, I will
Yeah.
credit him with he was concerned about the development of antibiotic resistance. Now, in classic film movie scientist thing, he invented this drug that changed the world and then spent quite a lot of time not campaigning against it, but
saying be careful.
He did say in a Nobel lecture, he cited underdosing by ignorant members of the public as the principal danger.
Yes.
The microbes then become more educated than those taking them. And they become resistant to penicillin, and a host of penicillin-fast organisms is bred out. And in such cases, the thoughtless person playing with this compound is morally responsible for the death of the man who succumbs to infection with the resistant organism. I hope this evil can be averted.
And then what happens? We end up with Godzilla.
Yeah. No, he knew well, and this is one of those things where you can't see this with all medications. I'm sure, Eleanor, you can tell me, in vivo or in vitro. But with antibiotics, because you're acting on the bugs themselves, and you can see it in a petri dish, he could see the dose-dependent changes in the bacteria right there in front of him. So he was not talking about some theoretical risk. He saw it right there. He could evolve antimicrobial resistance rapidly in his lab. And then so he was just saying, if this is happening in my petri dish, it's going to happen when you give this to other people. I will say one really cool thing about penicillin, and I'm glad that this was the one that made it big, because it has one massive advantage. penicillin does not get chemically altered from ingestion to circulation to excretion. Okay. So it does its thing, and then you pee it out, just like intact. And around the time when penicillin was being discovered, and now it was being highly used post World War II, and it was really, really important, you didn't have enough, right? You couldn't manufacture it in large batches. So what do? Well, you create the pea patrol. The pea
Oh,
patrol,
yeah,
Josh.
you're right.
Yeah, you create the pea patrol for penicillin and for pea. And pea patrol is going to go around and collect massive amounts of pee. And then they're going to send it over to the distillery, and they're going to crystallize the penicillin out of the urine and clean it up. And boom, bada boom, you've got a recycled penicillin ready to go out to the public again.
Penicillin. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Oh, by the way, you were talking about sulfonamides before.
Oh, yeah.
You are correct that sulfonamides were the first antibacterial, and take a guess who manufactured them.
Oh, was it
Good old Bayer again. There's that Bayer. Raising it. So they erased heroin, but then they have aspirin and now sulfonamide, which they call Prontosil.
Oh yes,
Because
the very first one, Prontosil.
Because we'll get it to you fast. Pronto.
Yes.
Crazy, right?
Crazy.
Oh, yeah.
And speaking of crazy, moving on to my number 5, chlorpromazine, the very first antipsychotic drug. Did it make either of your lists?
It did not make my list. Isn't that crazy? It didn't make
It's insane.
It's madness, I tell you. Madness.
It's madness.
I'll tell you, I didn't have chlorpromazine as an antipsychotic on my list, but I had something sort of similar, Josh, because it had the same kind of sudden impact on a neurological disease, and that was actually levodopa. From Oliver Sacks, because that was similarly, you had this horrible, neurological disorder, which, thought nobody could ever recover from. And it was just, that's it. This person's gone. They're a ghost. Their soul is gone. And, in the book and movie Awakenings, it shows, oh my gosh, no, you can bring them back from the dead almost.
That is a pretty impressive one, but affects only that one particular subset of the population.
Yes, that's true.
So here's why I'm going to argue this is one of our 7 change the world drugs.
Sure.
1950s, December 11th, 1951.
Was a day that will live in infamy.
I mean, in France. Paul Charpentier in the laboratories of the... Okay, look, I'm just going to put this out there. I'm terrible at pronouncing French, so...
Rhone Poulenc.
Okay. Paul Charpentier in the laboratories of the Rhone Poulenc, a French pharmaceutical company, first created chlorpromazine, but it wasn't recognized it was not recognized for its use in psychiatry until a year later by a surgeon, Henri Laborit, a surgeon and physiologist in the French army. And what he was looking for was to induce artificial hibernation in the prevention of surgical shock.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Okay, all right.
So he employed the drug as an adjunct to anesthesia because of its body temperature lowering effect, which I was not aware it had. Did you know that, Eleanor?
I believe I did know that. Yes, quite interesting.
Okay.
So, and he found that chlorpromazine, or CPZ, in the dosage of 50 to 100 milligrams produced disinterest without loss of consciousness and only a slight tendency to sleep. As in, sacre bleu, you're sawing off my leg! Here, have this. That's going to make it tougher to get around. Le bummer.
Le
sigh. The very first paper on chlorpromazine was published in the February 13th issue of La Presse Médicale with the title A New Vegetative Autonomic Stabilizer. Now here's where it gets interesting. Jacques LH, a 24-year-old severely agitated, psychotic, manic male, was the very first psychiatric patient to receive the drug. He was administered 50 milligrams at 10 a.m. on January 19th, 1952. The
Oh,
calming
wow.
effect was immediate, but since it only lasted a few hours, which is how they calculated the half-life as a psychiatric dosage, several treatments were required. But after 20 straight days of treatment with a total of 855 milligrams of CPZ, the patient was ready to exit the hospital and resume normal life.
Wow. Okay.
And it was believed, as we mentioned, those body temperature lowering effects, it's believed the drug worked by inducing artificial hibernation. So ice packs were used with the drug to enhance cooling.
Okay, gotcha. So at this time, they were correlating the drop in body temperature with the calming effect.
While looking for something that would make people hibernate, like bears from a few episodes back.
Yeah. Please go back if you haven't listened to our episode about bears. It's very good.
It's totally radical. Don't Winnie the Pooh that joke. Anyway, chlorpromazine became available for prescription in France in 1952 of November. So really a short time between making the drug.
Synthesis.
Thank you. Between synthesis, marketing, and prescription, and it was given the name Largactil for being large in action.
We actually had a really wonderful episode a while back, and Josh, that you did some beautiful reading on how drugs get named like this and the rules behind it. I think right now this naming would actually break our current rules because you're not allowed to say how good it is, in the name. So that's very
It didn't say
interesting.
good. It says large in action because it covered a wide variety of things from surgery to
Oh, but
psychiatric treatment.
still, it oversells it a little bit, but it does actually have quite a broad action. You're right.
And were it not for that, or it was really the very first treatment of anything for mental health, besides just locking people away in rooms with padded walls and jackets that let you hug yourself.
Yeah.
So this really opened up mental health illness as a treatable condition and stimulated the development of a wide variety of other psychotropic drugs. This led to recognition of chemical mediation at the synapse and receptor assays that it blocks dopamine receptors. And once they discovered the dopamine receptors, well, now we can talk about your Parkinson's drug and a wide variety of others that act on.
I understand what you're saying. It was kind of a break into not just, the brain, because we had anti-epileptics and stuff to this point, to treat seizures. But the idea that you could actually affect cognition like this, or, attitude, personality, whatever you wanted to call it, this was supposed to be a very sacred thing about who we were. And it was a little jarring as well, along with being revolutionary, this idea that like you could change the personality, like you could change the person with the medication, like, oh my God, So it was really a mini revolution in neurocognitive science.
We're going to pause here for a random commercial break. Random commercials because I don't actually know what's about to follow this.
Thank you.
We'll see you
Sponsor's name here.
in just a moment. And we're back. If we decided to cut this into a second episode, hello and welcome back to Travel Medicine. As always, I am still your friendly neighborhood internal medicine doc, Dr. J.
Is, as, and was your friendly neighborhood pediatric infectious disease doc and researcher, Dr. Santhosh.
And I'm your legal drug person, friendly pharmacist, Eleanor.
So, when last we left, we were talking about 7 drugs that had changed the world. Oh, I didn't sing it this time.
You have to sing it. You have to sing it.
We were talking about 7 drugs that changed the world. And we had made it through 5 from my list. How many from yours, Eleanor?
We've made it through 4.
Okay, and Santhosh, from yours?
I got 3.
All right. So I'm in the lead for the moment, but let's see. Let's see where else we can get. So for me, coming in at number 6, we've made it through World War II. We've made it through the 50s, now starting to treat mental health. 1960s, the decade of love, and most importantly, another life-changing medication, the pill.
This is what I love about this. And yeah, we've got listeners from all over the planet, but in English at least, you don't even need to say what the pill is. That's how impactful this drug was.
You don't get that kind of marketing.
No.
But the birth control pill
Yeah.
is actually an older concept, and of course, some form of birth control dates all the way back even to ancient Egypt. But I'm talking about actual medications around that we know, that we make, that we see in our everyday lives. And in the early 1920s, Germans again, good job, Germany. Just pat on the back to you.
Well, it was all of this came from organic chemistry, right? And so you had certain hubs around the world when you talked about particular disciplines and sciences. And Austria specifically was really a center for organic chemistry. And when it came to biochemistry after that and drug making, there you go.
So, Austrian scientist Ludwig Haberland published a paper suggesting that hormones could be used as an effective means of contraception in animals. And he may have soon after tested a hormone preparation in clinical trials, despite heavy criticism from colleagues who considered contraception to be, uh, at best, taboo. Um, In 1921, he demonstrated a temporary hormonal contraception in a female animal by transplanting ovaries from a second pregnant animal.
Mm.
In 1923, after some further successful work, he began highlighting the importance of clinical trials and presentations. So he's really putting out evidence-based medicine in the early 1920s and was almost immediately and repeatedly criticized and harassed by his colleagues who accused him of hindering unborn life.
Yeah. And so this kind of gives us a bit of historical perspective that this type of argument and, whatever side of whatever political spectrum or anything you're on, this has a long history. This is
From
not a
literally
recent
the
thing.
moment it was created.
From the
Mhm,
moment of
absolutely.
conception.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you, Eleanor. I'm glad somebody took that idea and brought it to term.
oh boy.
So this idea was contradictory to the moral, ethic, religious, and political agendas of that time in Europe. Official reports escalated. His family was ostracized. He refused any interviews. And despite this, he was still doing clinical trials in the 1930s after successful production of a preparation in fecundin by the G.
Okay.
Richter Company in Budapest, Hungary, preventing
Hmm.
fecundity. At the peak of his scientific career, he was basically blacklisted because of the disputed contraception project, and unfortunately, harassment and career blacklisting caught up with him, and he committed suicide on July 1932. And then nothing was said about contraception until the 1970s.
Wow.
Beginning in the 1950s, birth control advocate Margaret Sanger asked researcher Gregory Pincus to develop an effective contraceptive funded by the famous heiress Catherine McCormick. Pincus,
Wow.
now remember, we talked about all this being discovered in 1920s in Austria. Pincus found that progesterone helped to stop ovulation and managed to develop a trial pill. And this was tested in 1954 and 1955 in a couple preliminary Boston trials, a proof of concept. But they weren't going to be able to get it to the public without large-scale human trials because it wouldn't get FDA approval.
Sure. Yeah, you can't pilot, with these tiny little populations like this for something that's going to be so ubiquitously used, 50% of the population effectively. has a market.
So we have this great idea, first an Austrian scientist saying, hey, here's a way that we can just decrease birth in a way we can control. And then in the 50s, you have women campaigning to say, we need an effective hormonal contraceptive. We need to have choice. She finds another person to fund it. They get a working pill, but it's not going to get approval without large-scale human trials. All a lovely story, could be a movie like Air. Except, I got to bring this idea down to earth. Here's where things start to get a little controversial.
Yeah.
Yes. Another Langerhans thing is coming into play here.
Okay. Yeah.
Are you familiar with the story, Eleanor?
A little bit. A little bit.
You are welcome to fill in any gaps in my knowledge, but in 1955, Pincus went to Puerto Rico, one of the most densely populated areas in the world, and officials supported birth control as a form of population in the hope that it would stem Puerto Rico's endemic poverty. So, unlike the rest of the continental U.S., there were no anti-birth control laws on the books, and he was impressed with the extensive network of birth control clinics already in place on the island. 67 clinics using existing methods. Clinical trials were then conducted without informed consent or mention of side effects in this drug that had really only been tested mostly on animals and on a couple volunteers.
Yeah, it's sort of like the Tuskegee experiment in a way of Puerto Rico. It's a little disturbing.
And the only thing that you could, no, you can't justify this in any kind of a way. But at the very least, with the Tuskegee, you were refusing to treat people.
Yeah.
You were killing them in that case.
Yeah.
This one, and birth control pills can certainly have some scary effects, actually, in the way of, deep vein thromboses and this kind of thing. But if it had turned out that the side effect profile had been any different or, any worse, this could have become, quite genocidal in a sense. So, because you're actually actively giving out a medication in this case instead of withholding something.
Yeah, true.
So.
Dr. Idris Rice Ray, a faculty member of the Puerto Rico Medical School and director of the Family Planning Association, was in charge of the trials. In this sense, it was self-selected. It was only given to people who were already coming to these birth control clinics. That doesn't necessarily make it better, because you still don't have informed consent. Yes. But they're not just randomly distributing it to, I would say, a 100% unaware populace, only a 95% unaware.
Sure. As in, you're not like putting it in the water or something crazy like that.
These are people who are coming for birth control. They are giving birth control. They are just giving untested birth control. And after a year of tests, Dr. Rice Ray reported that the pill was 100% effective when taken properly, and that 17% of the women in the study complained of nausea, dizziness, headaches, stomach pain, and vomiting. Rock and Pincus listened carefully to Rice Ray's conclusions and observations, and said, our patients in Boston didn't have those negative reactions. This is probably just psychosomatic from a bunch of crazy women. And they also felt that problems like bloating and nausea are minor compared to all the contraceptive benefits of the drug.
This is, and if you want any other evidence of sexism in medicine,
talk about like rampant misogyny with this whole
story. You'll be fine. And and it also turns the whole thing on its head. Like, women aren't tough, and this guy, come on now. The things that the poor things they had to put up with. And now, and Eleanor, you can probably tell us, we're getting into male contraception, actually, hormonal contraception recently. And they're, unlike, when this was introduced for women way back when, the outcry from men about the side effects is so...
I demand more clinical trials.
I am embarrassed and sad to be part of this group that's supposed to be so macho.
So these benefits far outweighed any minor psychosomatic issues, and the drug was released by G.D. Cyril and Co. as Enovid, and it came out in 1960 with FDA approval, which was granted because the risk of pregnancy, as we said, was seen as greater than the risk of side effects like blood clots and strokes.
Yeah, those are minor issues. Yeah.
Well, and
Initially available only to married women and burdened with a 27.5% luxury tax.
Yeah, so bad. I and there is a little bit of a weirdness here, which is it's important for recent times. The vaccine causes these problems with the clock, and nobody went back and were like, we should maybe fix contraception for women because the problem seems to be on the other side of things. It reminded me actually of when we were having these horrible blowouts of tires with these SUVs, specifically with these SUVs. And everyone was going around saying, oh, those, Michelin tires are horrible or whatever they were. And but nothing was happening except if you put it on this insane monster of an SUV.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, guys, come on, we got to figure this out. So yeah, it's not fair because I think with a little bit of development and funding that we could really fix a lot of the problems with current hormonal contraception and make it a lot safer.
Well, it is pretty safe today. I mean, when it started out with these older formulations, they were using much, much higher doses of estrogens. And, over time, we've lowered and lowered and lowered the dose of estrogen to pretty minimal levels now. But yeah, some of the issues that were more early on associated with contraception, like the stroke and DVTs, that was due to much, much higher doses of estrogen. Not that it hasn't been reported with these low dose formulations, but it is the risk benefits very different today.
That is number 6. The last one, I don't have a long story about, but I do feel still pretty important. And that was in the 1990s, protease inhibitors, which of course was the very first drugs used to treat HIV infections. And that combined, although they weren't the first HIV drugs.
Oh, yeah, the AZT was.
Yeah. But combined with AZT, for the first time, doctors could keep HIV levels so low that patients never developed AIDS, and we took what had been a lethal disease and turned it into a condition that people can actually have pretty normal lives with.
Yep. I would agree with that.
So that is
as well.
So I don't have a big fancy historical story about it.
I just want to the major thing that the development of protease inhibitors showed, and along with AZT before that, and it kind of reflects also in the modern COVID era, it shows how quickly and amazingly the scientific community, and meaning the world scientific community, can advance understanding, treatment, and prognosis when you pay attention to a problem, when you fund it properly, and when you put enough minds behind it. I mean, we move so fast. The explosion of HIV medications and the point where we got from discovery of a virus all the way to control was neck-breakingly fast. It was insane. And again, it happened with COVID. And then the world community came together and development of mRNA vaccines all the way to treatment. I am constantly amazed at our ability as human beings to do this when we are willing to put in the time and effort, and yes, the money.
And the money.
And the money to do this. And recognize that, like, hey, if we just spend a concentrated amount of time and money on something and say, hey, this is important, we can basically just fix it.
Pretty much, yep.
This was supposed to be the impossible virus. Yeah, just a couple of decades, boom, normal life.
Speaking of that was something that did make my list, was just vaccines in general. I think game changer. that would make the list. Another one that I'm surprised that you didn't have on the list was Viagra.
Oh, that's true.
Viagra gets on some of these top 10 lists, top 7 lists too.
But did it change the course of human history?
Yeah.
Well, that depends on the gender you're talking to.
I'd probably, yeah. I'll say this: that I don't know of any other drug. Maybe Eleanor, maybe you can tell me, that made it from like production to worldwide recognition so goddamn fast.
Do you have ED?
Yeah, that was no. But and of course, beautifully that like this started off as a thing to help us with pulmonary hypertension and breathe better and this kind of thing. And then it's like, hey, by the way,
Yeah, exactly. By the way, I noticed. Oh, really?
Yeah, and he told his doctor.
Yeah. I have one other little pharmaceutical tidbit to mention, if I may.
By all means.
So this is not necessary. Well, this is actually an individual who I think changed the world in pharmacology. And for 2 drugs that were also real game changers. Have you ever heard of Sir James Black?
No.
Sir James
Black?
Black, yes, Sir James Black.
Okay.
He worked for SmithKline French, now GlaxoSmithKline.
Yeah.
And his group, he was a pharmacologist, and he was responsible for the creation of 2 medications, propranolol or Inderal, one of the first beta blockers that was a game changer in terms of managing angina. And one of the most widely prescribed medications in the world. And he also eventually went on to develop the first H2 blocker, cimetidine, known as Tagamet.
There you go.
And that was actually the very first blockbuster medicine.
That's right. Yeah. It was the first one that was advertised, I guess.
I think blockbuster has to do with its total sales of over $1 billion or something like that. But obviously H2 blockers, that was a huge game changer in terms of management of ulcers. Those pesky ulcers that plagued aspirin way back when.
Yeah.
Here since heroin.
Here's heroin. That's right.
Oh.
So yes, I had to mention Sir James Black with H2 antagonists and beta blockers.
That's okay. I will definitely look him up. He sounds like a wonderful person.
Yep.
So those are your 7, Eleanor?
Those are my 7, or let's see, 1, 2, 3,
so
4,
let's
5, 6, 8.
In case people forgot from the beginning, what are your drugs?
So my selections were Lipitor, or the HMG co-reductase inhibitors, aspirin, penicillin, insulin, protease inhibitors, and then I had also vaccines in general. I mentioned Viagra, and then of course the little extra tidbits are James Black with the H2 antagonists and beta blockers.
And Santhosh, did we cover all of yours?
I think we just about. I did have morphine on there. I had insulin and penicillin, so those were the 3 that we had in common. I didn't have protease inhibitors, but I actually had AZT as a nucleoside transcriptase inhibitor. I'm trying to actually recall my other 2, and I cannot remember them for the life of me off the top of my head. But I believe. Oh, sorry. They were in pediatrics. That's right, because they really changed the course of what we thought about actually taking care of babies. And the first one was surfactant. And that completely changed everything that we thought that how to support life in premature infancy, and it was an instant game changer in terms of at what age we could support life and have a child grow up to be healthy, even if they were premature. And I had the other thought which was because moms also get betamethasone, which is a steroid. And so up there was actually steroids. The ubiquity of steroids in medicine right now and everything that it did, and and the fact that the other medications, a lot of them that we talked about, like the pill, that in fact is a steroid hormone. And so yeah, I mean, broadly, it was very, very broad to just say like, oh, steroids like that. So it was maybe something like prednisone. But yeah, I of course tilted more in terms of pediatrics. I think the very first time I talked to you about it, I named all antibiotics, and you were like, no.
Yeah. I shot that. I like, what are the 7 most important? He's like, penicillin, and then Cipro. I'm just like, no, classes of drugs. He's like, tetracyclines, penicillins.
Yeah, I actually realized that I could do it because even though we discovered classes of antibiotics after penicillin, the idea was pretty much the same. After penicillin, it wasn't really a groundbreaking thing to take a antibacterial molecule from another bacteria or a fungus and examine its effects on a bacteria, and killing it that way. So it really wasn't very.
I'm so 1898. You're 1900 and late.
And you know what? I'm pretty sure that's what Alexander Fleming said to everybody. No, that's not true. He was famously a very humble gentleman. And I do want to give a shout out because he was kind of an example of, I think, what a lot of scientists should be. He didn't seek to patent or anything this medication. He wanted this discovery to be available to the world. And I'm not saying anything against making money, but that type of generosity was absolutely amazing. And it was part of what contributed to how life-saving penicillin was.
Probably just felt embarrassed because he's like, wow, all this because I forgot to clean up after myself when I went on vacation.
Stop it. I feel like an old like a mom, like a you don't listen to him, honey. You do your thing. You don't
need
listen to the bad man.
You don't need to clean your room, Alexander. The next Nobel could be in there.
Why is he from Staten Island all of a sudden? Go inside, honey. Don't listen to them.
You go play in garbage, honey. You're a scientist.
You're a scientist.
He wrote the book, because he's from New York, because, he wrote that book of fungus grows in Brooklyn.
Oh, boo. Oh, my God. That's it. I think you won the episode, Eleanor.
So that's it for this week. Let us know on the socials or in comments, or if you recognize us on the street. Creepy, but awesome. Let us know what your choices for the 7 drugs that change the world are to you. And next time we can come back and maybe try medical devices, or maybe we come back with 7 antibiotics. I don't know. We'll see.
We talk about antibiotics a lot, actually, on this podcast, mainly because of my bad influence. But yeah, I'd love to do that.
We will also have to take our pharmacist back into space to cover what's new in non-terrestrial medicine.
Yeah, I think we're very close. I think Eleanor will agree to this as well, that we're very close to putting a permanent colony somewhere, whether it ends up being the moon or Mars. So we're going to have to learn some fast lessons about how to care for people with medication and surgery in different space environments.
Yep, and we're woefully unprepared.
Oh, Oh no.
And then think about it. You get to choose 7 drugs that change
Change the moon.
The space,
Change the
change the moon. That's gonna be the next, like I'm gonna get out of here. I'm gonna change the moon, Mom.
I'm a rocket man. So that's it.
Get out of this one horse town and change the moon. Is he saying what I? Yes, just move along.
I'm gonna wipe this dusty regolith off my boots.
So join us next time when we return to space.
Like an aspiring Broadway actor from Kansas. I don't know why I gave him that personality, but okay.
As always, we love to hear your comments, questions, and feedback. If you'd like to support us spiritually, emotionally, or financially, links to do that are in the show notes, along with links for further reading. Special thanks to Eleanor for joining us and lending her expertise again.
Yay!
And as always, until next time, keep a song in your heart, soap on your hands, a shot in your arm. Find a place to go where you can share all those things. And once you've done all that, happy travels.
Change the moon, people.